Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%. In this special edition, we're focusing on women's rights and the French presidential election. We'll be looking closely at the gender policies of the two candidates, Emmanuel Macron and the far-right's Marine Le Pen, to see where they both stand when it comes to promoting equality. Plus, why has women's rights failed to make the radar so far in this election campaign? I'll be talking shortly to Megan Clement, the editor of the Impact newsletter on gender and politics. And also Me Too in the world of French politics and the dire need to end a climate of sexism and sexual harassment. But first, and as both presidential candidates have come to realise, the rapid rise in the cost of living is the major concern for French voters. It seems gender equality barely rated a mention in this campaign, which has also been very much overshadowed by the war in Ukraine. Claire Rush examines the policy platforms of both Emmanuel Macron and his far-right rival Marine Le Pen to see where each stands when it comes to women's rights.
I have pledged that the grand cause of my term will be gender equality.
Since taking office in 2017, Emmanuel Macron's government has overseen measures welcomed by women's rights activists, such as extending abortion term limits from 12 to 14 weeks, making contraception free for women under 25 years of age, legalizing in vitro fertilization for lesbian couples and single women, and strengthening protections for victims of domestic violence. But many French feminists were strongly opposed when Macron named Gérald Darmanin as Interior Minister in 2020. The hardline conservative politician was under investigation for rape when he was appointed. The probe was closed last year. Meanwhile, Macron's rival, Marine Le Pen, has changed her stance on women's rights issues in this year's campaign. In the past, she opposed laws requiring gender parity in the corporate and political spheres and called for scrapping public health subsidies for abortion, saying women should pay for them. Gender equality is not a key component of her policy platform, and when she does speak on it, it's often linked to other issues such as immigration and religion.
Your vote will determine the rightful prevalence of French culture and language, the customs of our regions, and the lifestyles of French people, and the laws and values of the Republic, the most important of which are secularism and equality, especially between men and women.
Women's rights groups have accused Le Pen of using the issue of gender equality for electoral gain.
Joining me in the studio is Megan Clement, a Paris-based journalist and editor of the Impact newsletter, which covers gender and politics across the world. Megan, thank you so much for your time. When we look at this campaign, why is it that women's rights have featured so little?
It's been a confluence of factors. I do think the war in Ukraine has overshadowed things, particularly at the start of the campaign. We've moved to the cost of living crisis, which Marine Le Pen has campaigned quite heavily on. But essentially, I think from the beginning, we've seen this as a contest between Macron on the centre-right and Marine Le Pen on the far-right. And campaigns that are fought on the right don't tend to involve women's rights. And I think if we had seen Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the left-wing candidate, make it to the second round, we might be more now having a conversation on this subject. So I think it's a range of factors, but I think people are disappointed, feminists are disappointed, as this is the first election France has had since the Me Too movement and its various offshoots here as well.
So looking at Emmanuel Macron to begin with, this is a man who, as we saw in that report, from the outset of his presidency, declared that gender equality would be a major priority. So 5 years on, where do we stand?
So Macron and his government have passed a range of measures that have been women-friendly. They can be seen as feminist policies: free contraception for the under 25s, expanding fertility treatment to single women and lesbian couples, even extending paternity leave. This is good for women. However, he has come under criticism by women's rights groups because of the level of investment that he's made in women's rights. As you say, he said this was his great cause of his presidency. He said if he's elected again, it will be the great cause of his second. But the budgetary means really haven't been what people have asked for, what feminist organizations have asked for. And so there is criticism there. And also we've seen by working with Gérald Darmanin, who was under investigation for rape when he was given the job, that was a real breach of trust, I think, between the government and women's rights organisations as well. That's been hard to get past.
Now, if you look at the far-right rival, Marine Le Pen, the ultimate irony is that if she did indeed win this election, she would become the country's first ever female president. She now describes herself as a feminist. Some are saying that that is an opportunistic move. So what indeed are her policies when it comes to women's rights?
She has very few. If you look through her official program, women's rights does not come up really at all. What she does do is she uses women's rights as a means to advance her agenda when it comes to immigration and opposing multiculturalism, as it were, in France. So she has, for example, said that she wants to ban the wearing of the veil in the street. She says that she wants to deport immigrants who engage in street harassment of women. So it's very much, she instrumentalizes women's rights for her ultimate aim, which with the far right is always anti-immigrant.
Given what is at stake here and the desperate need by each candidate to win over the undecided voter, is this not the time for gender issues to be addressed?
I would love it to be the time for gender issues to be addressed. And I think, you know, this could be an easy goal for Emmanuel Macron. Before the campaign, a range of feminist organizations asked for €1 billion in the first 100 days of the next campaign, of the next presidency, to be invested in intimate partner violence. A range of candidates on the left promised to do that. They didn't make it to the second round. And now I think for Macron to restore some trust with feminists, it would be a great measure for him to say, yes, I'll give you that billion. That would kind of repair some of the damage that's been done there.
Let's just pause there, Megan. And as we just spoke about, Emmanuel Macron prides himself on making sexual and gender-based violence a priority of his 5-year mandate. Yet the stigma around it lingers, with political parties unwilling to commit to ensuring that women can take part in political life without fear of harassment. Emerald Maxwell has more.
A podcast on sexual and sexist violence in politics. It was an idea dreamt up by Fiona Texer and Hélène Goutani between 2 lockdowns. A few months later, as the presidential campaign gathers steam, the 2 young women want to make it a hot topic.
We wanted to give a voice to the women who take part in our country's politics and who suffer this violence more often than not in silence.
Fiona Texer has worked for elected officials for 13 years. She's witnessed and experienced this violence firsthand.
It starts with the odd remark about what you're wearing or something, then it becomes more or less lewd. This in a context where you're in an inferior position, because as an employee, you're bound by a contract. In my case, it has also gone further. Sometimes it was sexual assault, such as touching my bottom, my breasts or my thighs, uninvited, of course.
How did you react when you were subjected to that?
I just took it.
It was so the younger generation wouldn't have to just take it that the 2 women, along with others, launched Me Too politics and wrote an article published last November in the French daily Le Monde, calling on political parties to dismiss the perpetrators.
How is it that we can have members of parliament who are perpetrators of sexist and sexual violence and who are not called to account in terms of their mandate and duties?
According to a survey by the Élus Locaux network, 74% of elected women have been victims of sexist and sexual violence. The exchange you're about to hear took place between the mayor of Paimpol and her predecessor during a town council meeting.
J'ai le droit de répondre, maîtresse, ou tu vas encore m'empêcher de parler?
Franchement, monsieur Martin, vous ne me parlez pas comme ça.
Alors là, je te parle comme je veux, ma cocotte.
Non. Parce qu'il y a un règlement intérieur. Vous m'appelez encore une fois maîtresse, je vous demande de sortir du conseil municipal. Je suis madame la maire.
Hein, pardon?
This exchange was recorded, but most of the time, the aggression takes place far from the cameras. Mathilde Viau knows this trivialized sexism well. For a long time a parliamentary assistant, she founded a network dedicated to reporting sexist behaviour and sexual assaults within the National Assembly.
This issue must be a focus of public debate. which still tends to be dominated by powerful white, upper-middle-class men who are rarely called to account for their actions.
The victims' voices are being heard, but the political world has difficulty listening. Only 3 parties on the left have so far committed to not hiring, funding or sponsoring perpetrators of sexist and sexual violence.
And watching that report with me is Megan Clement, a Paris-based journalist and editor of the Impact newsletter. A reminder there, once again, Megan, that until we have equality in the world of politics, then women's rights will always be an afterthought.
Unfortunately, it does seem like that's the case, and we do have a problem with sexism politics in this country, as we've seen. It's often a very hostile space for women. France is doing better. It's got the highest proportion of seats held by women than it's ever had currently, but it's still around 38%. So it's not close to parity as it should be. And the Me Too politics movement has really shone a light on the kind of behaviour that women, and not just women politicians, but women parliamentary assistants, anyone who works in that space, any woman that works in that space, often has to face just to do their jobs.
Megan Clement, it's been great having you here. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for now. You can get in touch and keep up with the 51% on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, and you can catch our previous programs on the France 24 website. So until our next show, bye for now.